welcome to this explainer, everyone. Today, we're going to embark on a seriously epic geographic journey. We are going to map out the dynamic, constantly shifting boundaries of the ancient Pallava Kingdom. This was a mighty dynasty that held power for an astonishing 6 centuries, from the middle of the 3rd century right up to the first decade of the 10th century. But, mapping an empire that lasted that long isn't as simple as just drawing a single line on a map. These borders breathed, they pulsed, they expanded, and they contracted. And by looking at exactly where they stretched, we can really start to understand the immense story of the Pallavas. Okay, let's dive into this. Because when we talk about the Pallava Empire, we are not talking about some small regional footprint. At its absolute height, this thing was a titan. It covered an area larger than modern-day France, England, and Germany combined. I mean, just imagine that. They started as local rulers in the Andhra region, honestly, perhaps even as a pastoral tribe, and they completely transformed into this continental superpower. They encompassed vast tracts of South Asia, pulling together what are today distinct cultural and linguistic boundaries into one immense, unified realm. So here's our map for today's explainer. First, we'll look at the heart of the empire. Then, the north to south stretch. After that, the east to west frontiers. And finally, the shifting borders and the eventual decline. Section 1. The heart of the empire, Tondaimandalam. Because before an empire can really stretch its legs, it needs a strong heartbeat. It needs an immovable cultural and political center to anchor all those vast conquests. For the Pallavas, that absolute heartbeat was Tondaimandalam. This core region was tucked safely between the North Penner and North Vellar rivers. And actually, there's a really fantastic piece of linguistic trivia here that ties the geography directly to the people. The very term Pallava actually translates to creeper in Sanskrit, and that perfectly aligns with their homeland's nickname, the land of creepers. Over in Tamil, the word Tondi carries a similar meaning. So when the Pallavas established their authority here, they were quite literally embedding themselves in the landscape of their namesake. And right smack in the middle of this land of creepers sat the crown jewel, Kanchipuram. Nestled beautifully on the northern bank of the Pallava River, this capital city served as the permanent anchor for the Pallavas. From here, the kings could gaze outward, totally secure in their heartland. And, the Pallava River wasn't just some scenic backdrop, it was a vital artery for irrigation and agriculture, fueling the incredible prosperity they needed to fund their grand architectural visions and their massive military campaigns. Section 2, the north to south stretch, a vertical empire. Let's move on and see exactly how this localized core built outward into a massive vertical empire. Now, what's really interesting about this is if you picture the Indian subcontinent, in the north, at the absolute height of their power, the Pallavas reached all the way up through Andhra Pradesh, touching the mighty river Godavari. And simultaneously, down in the south, they pushed deep into Tamil Nadu, extending their authority all the way down to the river Kaveri. They effectively became the undisputed masters of the entire eastern seaboard, connecting these two massive river systems. Of course, this massive vertical stretch wasn't just conquered overnight. It was a centuries-long project. Starting way back in the early 4th century with Sivaskandhavarman ruling from the Krishna River down to the South Pennar, things fluctuated wildly. But then in 436 CE, Simhavarman IV ascended the throne and boldly recovered lost northern territories right up to the mouth of the Krishna. And that really set the stage for the late 6th century when the empire truly exploded under King Simhavishnu, who stretched the realm out to those extreme limits of the Godavari and the Kaveri. Simhavishnu is such a central figure in this geographic story. Historical sources actually tell us he was sent on a massive southern expedition specifically to conquer the Chola country, and he was ruthlessly successful. By defeating rival kings and occupying Cholamandalam, he firmly planted the southern flag at the river Kaveri. So because of his specific military ambitions, the Pallava Empire transformed from a dominant regional force into a sprawling, terrifyingly large vertical empire. Section 3, the east to west frontiers, coast to plateau. Let's shift gears, right? An empire isn't just measured vertically, so let's explore their massive horizontal reach. Moving from the crashing waves of the ocean into the deep, rocky interior of India. Let's physically walk across this landscape step by step to really visualize this crazy east to west stretch. We start with our feet in the waters of the Bay of Bengal on the bustling Coromandel coast. Moving westward, we trek through that fertile, river-fed Tondaimandalam core we just talked about. But we don't stop there. We push further west, leaving the coastal plains and climbing up into the rocky, rugged terrain of the Deccan Plateau until we finally hit the far western boundaries, touching the banks of the Tondaimandalam River and what is today the Bellary district. And we've got to remember, that eastern border, the coastline, it wasn't just a line in the sand. It was a thriving maritime frontier. This coastal belt contained incredible natural harbors, most notably Mahabalipuram. These weren't just places to park boats, they were vital, bustling ports for international trade. The geography here allowed the Pallavas to reach far beyond the Indian subcontinent, making direct contact and trading heavily with China, Ceylon, and a whole bunch of other regions in Southeast Asia. So the really crucial point is how they secured that deep western boundary. It wasn't always through bloodshed and battle. Early on, sure, Skandavarman used sheer dominance to extend into the Bellary district, but later expansion was often intensely political. Take Viracocha, for example. Following the fall of the Satavahana power, he secured the western frontiers, touching modern-day Karnataka through brilliant strategic matrimonial alliances with the Chudo Nagas of Vanavasi. Geography was conquered in the royal court just as often as it was on the battlefield. Section 4. Shifting Borders and Decline. Because, as with all great stories of antiquity, what expands is eventually gonna contract. Ancient borders were super fluid, deeply vulnerable to unrest, and eventually, they faded away entirely. Despite their absolutely massive size, larger than those 3 European countries combined, the Pallava authority shrank back pretty frequently. This waxing and waning of power was just a constant reality. For instance, aggressive incursions by the Kadambas from the west actually saw the Pallava headquarters briefly occupied. And then during the intense Calabar uprising, which was a dark period where rebels vehemently protested the massive land grants given by the rulers, the Pallava authority contracted sharply, forcing them to retreat all the way back into their Tondaimandalam core just to survive. Ultimately, every historical map has an expiration date, and for the Pallavas, that defining number is 893 CE. That's the year their geographic boundaries were effectively wiped off the political map. The Chola king Aditya I completely liquidated the Pallava power. The great Tondaimandalam core, the vast stretches from the Godavari to the Kaveri, all of it passed under the control of the rising Chola Empire. And this brilliantly illustrates a fascinating paradox. The political borders of the Pallava Empire vanished over 1,000 years ago, sure, but their physical footprint, it is still impossible to ignore. Their monumental Dravidian art and architecture, those glorious towering granite-carved temples in Mahabalipuram and Kanchipuram, they permanently occupy the South Indian landscape today. They might no longer own the geography, but they literally permanently altered its skyline. Which leaves us with this final thought. When a kingdom rules an area larger than Western Europe for 600 years, they don't just leave behind some rocks. They synthesize cultures, they blend languages, and they connect rivers, coasts, and plateaus into a shared destiny. So, how does the geography of a vanished empire continue to shape the culture and the very identity of South India today? It's definitely something to think about the next time you look at a map, and realize that right beneath those modern borders lie the ghosts of the mighty Pallavas. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.